I'm excited about this when the architecture is flat. There's a few little fun bits in here that I'm going to try not to talk about constantly. But yeah, there's a few fun bits. During the Q&A, I'll come back and talk about all the graphical bits that kind of amused me. Real quick, I said this before and I'll say it again. Sponsors make events like this possible. I ran Chicago's M365 Chicago back in November, and sponsors made it so we could have giveaways and made it so we could thank our speakers and made it so we could support charities. And so thank you to all of the sponsors and, of course, the event organizers who give us a platform with which to make sure people hear our voices, because we like hearing our voices.
It's true.
My name is Jay Leask. I've been in IT for 20 years. I've done everything from project management and business analysis to development. I'm currently the principal solution engineer and lead strategist for AvePoint Public Sector, and I run a couple of podcasts at onthespot.tech, This Week in Teams, which is a Microsoft Teams focused podcast, and Buzzkill, which talks all about IT and change management topics for IT that no one is ever giving us permission to spend time and budget on. That's what I do. Yeah. Joy?
Yes, I am Joy Apple, Microsoft MVP, and a modern workplace strategist. So I get to spend my time helping my clients figure out how to get from where they are today on file shares or Google Docs or maybe old versions of on-prem SharePoint, which we'll be talking about soon, into the modern, amazing, and exciting world of Microsoft 365 and SharePoint Online. I've been working with Microsoft products and technologies for over 12 years now. It hurts when we add up all the years. And don't do it. Don't do the math, Jay. It hurts. And when I'm not doing all that fun stuff with Pate Group, then I'm doing Joy of SharePoint stuff. So webinars and social media and all that fun stuff.
So if you enjoy this presentation and want to get access to the content, we're going to be sharing the deck. Joanna, I haven't talked about it, but I'll probably try to convince her to let me share it on the spot.tech, just like I did my last presentation. So worst case scenario, look at our Twitter handles and we'll put links to it there.
Yes.
On to the presentation.
Dun, 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 dun.
I would like to start out by talking about the fact that for years we have followed a hierarchical information architecture for SharePoint that is a lie. It is incorrect. We should not be doing it. And here's what we're here to talk about. If you came from the 2007s or older, don't admit it in the chat, but we know who you are. You've seen this. You're used to that largest to smallest capability where you've got a farm with web apps, with site collections and root sites and subsites and 17 levels later, nobody knows where their content is, but that's where it is. And this concept has been around forever. And what it looks like in reality is this very deep architecture.
And to be fair, what we're showing on the screen here, of course, we're going to pick on IT because that's what we do. This is just literally the tip of the iceberg. Yes, so you had that corporate homepage, which we all know even then was a home site, and everyone had access there. And then we would create a site collection for every department, and that would be a landing page and everyone had access there, right? So we start big and we go small. And within that site collection, technical definition of a site collection is collection of sites.
A collection of sites?
You're gonna make it too difficult, Jay. I knew you would try to get way too technical there. And typically once we would break down to that next level, permissions started breaking and we get deeper and deeper and deeper. And this only goes what? Let me think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels deep.
That's not deep at all. That's shallow.
It never went. Yeah, it never stopped there. And then within those individual sites, you would have libraries with folders and folders and folders and folders and folders. I once spent 6 weeks helping a subcontractor, government world, elevate folders that were 12, 14, 20 levels deep up into standalone libraries. Sometimes those folders that were 20 levels deep had their own permissions and then permissions in there. Those needed to be their own sites, right?
Yeah.
We got that stuff and just brought it up to the top because the deeper you go, the harder it is to get there and the more tangled those permissions go.
Yeah, and this is I still see this all the time. I'll talk about one of our U.S. government customers who they have an annual culling of the site collections and reorganization because this major now reports to that general, and with them goes this organizational unit and all of the content and the problems that go with that. And but we did it for a reason, right? We did this because we were told to. um,
Fine.
we did it because in that DoD customer that I just mentioned, that it made it easy to say, hey, you are a site collection administrator and you can build out anything you want here. And I, as IT, don't need to get involved until you screw something up, excuse me, till you make a mistake and erase all of your site permissions. And I need to come back in and rebuild that for you. Like it allowed IT to get out of the day-to-day management and hand it to somebody else, right?
And who doesn't like to pass the buck to somebody else? And honestly, not permissions, but navigation was a lot easier, right? Because, all right, here's my permission set here. So if I create a subsite, okay, I'm just going to inherit from parent, and then call IT when I need a special link put somewhere that's not being inherited. But that was a compelling reason to keep building within that structures because the navigation kind of built itself out
Yeah.
most of the time.
Yep. And frankly, it's what we were used to. I think you put this in the notes, but I'm totally going to steal it from you. We came from we came from file shares, and most people have traditionally used SharePoint as a web-based file share. So why not create another level? Whether it's a folder or a site collection, it's what's in our head. We need to put content here. We're going to break it down to a new folder structure. And so it's the way we've always done it. But if I'm not going ahead too soon, architecture has evolved and so should we. So, we only have another half hour or so. We're gonna have to sum it up as we go through, right? But the first thing is that Microsoft is now focused with the features and functionality at that top level site. They're driving us to use a flatter architecture um, based on how they're building out their features.
And that's important to pay attention to. You could hear that word, and our business people hear that, and they're like, okay, so, and they still keep doing what they've been doing,
Yes.
and start realizing that permissions aren't working out. Well, how come when I'm in this subsite and my planner where's my, well, how come I can't have a team for my subsite? How come, right? Because all of those good features, Microsoft 365 groups, right? They're magic.
Yep.
They're focused at that top level site in the site collection, right? The parent site. So in our
Yep.
minds, we're going back to that mentality I used to preach a little bit to my users. A site is a site is a site is a site. And instead of just thinking of that as this side is the same as this side, we got to just bring that out a little bit.
Yeah.
And best practice speaking, we'll drop that buzz phrase. We should always be scoping permissions at the site level. The best practice has always been to secure the largest object possible, which, to be real, in the architecture world, the largest object possible would be our site, that top level site, not lists and libraries. There's an exception to every rule. We'll talk about that
Sure.
if we have time later. Definitely not folders. Hear me preach. We want to look at
Yes.
the site level.
Yeah. And the other thing, you kind of blew my mind when you said this because I never really thought about it. But and it was so good I actually used it in Craig's in my presentation last hour, which is the fact that search respects contact at that higher level in the architecture. If you go 3, 4, 5 levels down, the weighting of your search results is not as strong as if it was 1 or 2 levels down or from the top. So by flattening, not only are you following Microsoft's best practices, not only are you enabling access across all of the tools, you're actually enhancing your search results, making sure the system is more usable for the end user, not less, like your instinct is to say it is, because navigation is weird, right?
And this isn't in the notes, but I just feel the need to say it. How many of us have heard over the last decade or more, SharePoint search sucks? Sure, it can if we don't, put a lot of work and effort into it. But if we start raising content up and we use, metadata and all that fun
Mhm.
stuff, search shines, and we become
Yes.
kind of lazy because we could just search for it and search will return it to us. It's magic.
Yeah, I have this conversation with people all the time, and whenever they tell me that search doesn't work, I ask them how they organize their stuff.
How
Whenever they,
and
when
how are
it,
you searching?
well, there's that, and I'm not getting. That's another presentation for another day, I think. So let's talk about this. We talked a little bit about why. Let's talk about what does this look like when we do it correctly.
Don't
And
freak
and
out.
I forget if this is my slide or your slide. To be frank.
It's our slide.
That's fair. So, what we have here is a representation of a flat architecture, and it kind of scares people because everything's at the same level. But what we've done is we've broken it out so that you can see, for example, we go all the way to the left side, and you can kind of see that we cut off there. That's where the home page becomes. It becomes a site collection flat on its own. And then we've broken out each of these sections in logical ways to say that, these are all of my training and development sites and teams. If
Mhm.
I move all the way over here, we've got a handful of operations sites and teams. By understanding what they are, who they belong to, what their purpose is, and maybe what their tech is, the green being SharePoint and the purple in this case being Teams, you can begin to think about, well, maybe there is a method to how I organize my IA.
Yep. And this can be panic inducing. Totally understand that because when I started kind of first getting into this, I kind of had to take a deep breath and really start consuming information before I let my brain kind of spin out of control. But we're not architecting according to the org chart. And if you've ever lived in a world where people architected according to the org chart, you know how bad it hurts because there's going to be a reorg and it's going to be horrible. If we do it this way, every site is like a building block in your Lego sets, right? It's agile. Oh, I shouldn't use that word. That has bad connotation sometimes, but they're modular, right? We're
There
not
you
we're
go.
not doing agile SharePoint. Don't even go there. But
Right.
they're modular, right? And
Yep.
it starts to fix a lot of the places where it used to hurt.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what oh, hold on, I have to zoom out before I can do it. About how Microsoft 365 really supports this.
Mhm.
It's funny, this first bullet, when we first put it together, I kind of cringed. I'm like, no, there's no more subsites. And you're like, there are no more folders. And as we crossed that out, we went, there's that flat architecture concept where,
Uh-huh.
yes, the items inherit from the libraries, inherit from the site collections, but by not putting in the extra subsites and the extra folders, that means we aren't concerned about whether or not this item has the same permissions as this one way over there.
Mhm. And if we follow that thought, so people come up and go, well, wait a minute. You mean you're going to tell me I'm going to go create a site because I want a folder that has special permissions for these 20 documents. Now you're saying I need a site. Okay. Are there tasks that surround that documentation? Is there a different audience? Something tells me there's a different audience because we're wanting to put granular permissions around it. Any kind of schedule go around it? Do you need revisions? Do you need edits? Would you like to communicate about this real time as you're working on it? That's a team site and a team that we just described. So it's another
Yep.
building block in our architecture.
Yeah. And there is, we'll talk a little bit about how you determine what what tool supports what
Mhm.
capability, and when do we create a this versus a that. But understanding that this is all possible helps us to start doing things like your favorite, get clear visibility in Admin Center of everything that exists in my farm, right?
Absolutely. Those of us who've been old school admins remember the pain and suffering of going to central admin, and we saw our web applications and we saw our site collections. We had no
Yeah.
idea what was really in those site collections. It's just the tangled knots of broken permissions. We would go add ourselves to the site collections. We could go jump in and help, and then go, oh my gosh, what have you people done?
Yeah.
When you break it out and everything becomes its own standalone site, you actually get a clear representation in the admin center of what you've really got built out for Teams and SharePoint. That's refreshing. It's a
Yeah.
little, you have some moments, especially if you've not locked down who can create teams and groups and sites and all that fun stuff, governance. But it's nice to be able to see what you've got.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong. As an AvePoint employee, I'm thankful for the mess that you had when you looked in Admin Center. It gave us a reason to develop things like DocAv Administrator, where we could show you all of those things in a different light. But the fact is that now we're in Office 365, able to see everything, able to more clearly understand. And this last bullet, this is that story I was talking about, that the fact that you can associate content with a hub site, so you can build out your architecture based on whatever means you need. For example, organizational. You
Mm-hmm.
can put all of the IT functions on one hub site and get that relationship you need. But when the organization restructures, you don't need a migration tool to move your content or scripts to hopefully not break configurations while you reorganize everything. You simply change the association to a different hub site. And so you really clean up using a flat architecture how everything is laid out and how it's all connected.
Mm-hmm. We've got a comment. I want to read it. The
Yeah.
challenge is convincing management not to build based on the org structure. And then we've got in quotes, pushing on a string. So if you show them how they can create hubs based
Yeah.
on today's org chart, and then tomorrow when we reorg, or in 6 weeks, whether we need to or not, how quickly that hub can be redesigned to meet the new structure without
Mhm.
buying third-party tools, without the pain and suffering of trying to do the migration without a third-party tool. Magic.
No.
I'm
I,
using that
I'm
word a lot. I can tell it's Friday. Magic.
I'm not gonna necessarily say without third-party tools as much, because otherwise my job goes away, but it lets you focus too. So
Yeah.
so third-party tools may be necessary. Tony, you mentioned Team
It's
Sprawl as the new fun. You're absolutely right. And with either the Power Platform or the power of a third-party tool, point governance, you have the ability to control that sprawl, but it's you're not just getting rid of the sprawl of or the organizational problems of SharePoint. You're increasing its functionality. So as you are having that conversation and teaching your management about hub sites and how that's connected, also teach them about how this increases search. Teach them about how this increases usability of the platform. Though each piece helps to put the proper weight behind behind the right decision ultimately.
Yeah. I'm going to give myself a shameless plug here. I do have a
Please.
presentation I can tweet out from somewhere later, all about hub sites and rethinking our intranet navigation, but about how you can use hub sites to fix that feeling of disjointedness when everything goes wide. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Enjoy. If you need a home for that, I think you should have one. But if you need one, I'm happy to host it on our website.
Yeah. That's so kind.
So, what does this look like in reality? In front of us, we've got a couple of examples, again, picking on IT more than anything else. We've got the IT hub site, and connected to that hub site, we have SharePoint site collections associated with Teams, associated with communication sites, etc. And you can start to see how that architecture works. So in a team, for example, and this is what my favorite is, or sorry, in a SharePoint site, you've got your news and announcements, you've got your resource libraries, et cetera. But in a team, you can start to show your management, this is where they're chatting, this is where they're sharing files. And we could build logical lines to show them where those files are stored if you wanted to. And when you get the inevitable, that's great, but now I've built an island in a team where they can't access whatever information they need in another SharePoint site. Let me zoom way out and then come back in. As an example, those tabs within your teams become that logical connection. They give insight into, for example, resource libraries in another SharePoint site collection, or into the training request process, or if I jump all the way over to the other side, into the blogs portion of another team, for example.
It gets kind of in the weeds sometimes when we're talking with our business users about building out teams to truly be your hub for teamwork, right? How many times have we seen that phrase, heard that phrase? I say that phrase way too much. But when it clicked in my brain is when I remember if I read or if I heard that Teams is positioned to become the service application delivery platform for the business. So what do you do every day? Build a way to get to that in Teams wherever it makes sense. So really all a tab is, I call it an easy button. We could also call it a link to get to content that's anywhere we have access to. Some say the new desktop for everyone.
Yes.
That's not untrue. I had a client ask me, she said, so you're telling me this library I've tabbed to that's on a communication site, that's a live tab. I said, think about it as opening another browser tab.
Yep.
Right? Bring it to you instead of you having to play application hopscotch and go find that other app, that other site, that document.
Yeah, I was talking with, I think it was my conversation with Chris Hord earlier this week. He called Teams the operating system with all the tools that are loading inside of it. It's not that far a stretch from where we are, right?
It's not.
So, and by the way, Joy, I'm sorry. The notes totally said on that slide, Joy is happy to start this slide.
But yet you went ahead. So
I didn't see it until I was halfway through.
Share and share alike. So I'll start this one then. So if you're thinking about coming into this modern world, if you haven't come over yet, if you're coming from on-premises SharePoint, okay, you got some work coming up, especially if you've got a lot of subsites, because those are going to, I hope, just do it, become their own standalone top-level sites. Probably going to need to do some work on the home pages, right? Some things are going to need to happen. Permissions are definitely going to need to be addressed, because if you think about a subsite inheriting permissions, they just use the parent site's groups. They're going to have their own brand new empty groups. But let's be real. How many of us really probably need to go through our SharePoint sites, do a little attestation that permissions are true and accurate, correct, right? So it's a good thing. You can use this time, use this as an exercise to do maybe some over-needed cleanup, some real in-depth look at permissions.
Yeah. It's a buzzkill. It's nobody, I know, I feel like I should have little dollar signs every time I mention the name of my podcast, right? It's a buzzkill because we know this needs to happen, but the number of customers that I'm talking to right now who need to migrate hundreds of terabytes of content to SharePoint Online in 6 months, I'm like, okay, let's talk about that. But as part of this plan, let's make sure we put on the end of this the cleanup process you're going to have to include. Because if you just migrate this content and walk away, you're
going to have a bad time.
Yeah. We'll be talking again in 12 months.
Yep. You could, well, shameless plug. My company comes in quite a bit and does some
Hmm.
of this heavy lifting, actually using an AvePoint tool quite a bit to do some of this work. But it's the same things. Like Craig, I think it was you that said everyone wants to know how to do it, but people don't really want to put the work there to do it.
Yep.
Um, yeah, it's going to cost money either in internal man hours or in consultant company man hours or something because it is work, but there's going to be a return on that investment in productivity.
And it's, I know it's prove it. Where's the ROI? Show me the calculator. And it's like, oh, okay. I mean, if this is really the conversation we have to have, I'll do my best. But when you go home, like, do you have a to-do list, or do you just try and do stuff off the top of your head and hope you remember it all? And
Mhm.
the productive managers have a to-do list. They've planned it out. They've sat down and thought, this is what my day is going to look like tomorrow. These are all completely relevant pieces of the conversation to get them to realize that if they just wake up and wing it all day long, by the end of the day, they're going to be exhausted. They're not going to have gotten done everything they want to do. Same concept here. Sorry, I went off on I'm a stop now.
So, bringing him back in,
Yeah.
the idea of unnesting all those sites, because we were talking about this in chat at the beginning of the presentation. Human beings love to nest things. We love to build things that go together. We love that deep structure. We love to go 30 folders deep in a library. We love 50 sites deep in a site collection. And when you say, no, stop it, everything's going to be its own site, people go, oh my gosh, what's going to hold it together? How am I going to find things? Where's it going to be? These sites, and this literally is how my imagination works. It's just like they're just floating around out there.
Yeah.
But we have our tenant, right? awesomecompany.sharepoint.com/site/human resources/IT team/fun department, right? It's all right there. Nothing's loose. And then
Yep.
again, we use those modern features and functionality to use hubs to bind
Yes.
together the things that need to come together. So let's say you're a manufacturing company and you have a site for every manufacturing facility, and those break out into teams and team sites and all that jazz. You can have a manufacturing hub to relate them all together. So you have a wide architecture, but they're related in scope. Hub sites is the feature for you, right? And it just starts to kind of bring us back to that family feel that we used to have with parent and child sites. Now it's just an association that can very easily be updated whenever it needs to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had this conversation a number of times over the past 5 years. If you are a SharePoint admin, you are also a business analyst, and you
Yeah,
are
that's
also
true.
an information architect, and you are also a hundred other roles that it becomes very hard to really push these thoughts out and push management to buy into what you're doing, because they look at you as a SharePoint admin. You go admin teams, like, so you have to start helping them see, like, look, everything's flat. That means the nested permissions are gone. That means, let me click through. Boop. There we go. That means that a as new teams are created, the groups that are associated with those teams can be connected to the other tools in the ecosystem, and things begin to make sense rather than be forced into position.
And from the user's perspective, too, when did they put in a ticket for the help desk? When something wasn't working, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's broke, fix it. So we get happy users because there's less stuff breaking. A
Yeah.
lot of the help desk time and effort is spent. Well, so and so sent me a link to the site and I can't get in, things like that. So that starts to go away. They get
Yeah.
more cool stuff they can do. And again, admins, and that every 6 months we reorg whether we need to or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not painful anymore. Permissions are clean. because we're happy, they're happy. And I'll be honest, I say this almost every time I do one of my Joy of SharePoint webinars or a Pate Group webinar, or anything. It's like, this is the most exciting time to be in the SharePoint world, because there's all this stuff going on that 10 years ago, I don't even know if we were dreaming to be able to do it. You
Yeah.
know, it's just
Yeah.
wicked cool.
Yeah. The tools support what you want to be able to do.
Mhm.
I know there's, if you develop a lot, if you write a lot of code, like there's some limitations as to how Office 365 supports the old way of doing that. But like the
Yep.
flattened architecture, there are new tools to support those capabilities as well. And the more you look at the roadmap of Office 3 or Microsoft 365 and the rebranding they do constantly, but the more you look at these capabilities, the more you realize that this flat architecture is designed to support all of that.
Yes.
And the more you resist that, the harder it is to bring those new capabilities into your world.
So I feel the need to say resistance is futile, because you queued it up. I'm sorry. But it really is, if you want to use that because of the Microsoft 365 groups. It's okay. So I'm such a nerd. I was telling Jay that I talk about groups being the force that binds Microsoft 365 together. And they truly are, because that lets us give folks the permissions they need to all those apps all at once.
Yes.
It streamlines it. They come alongside SharePoint, and it just makes things start to work really well.
Yep. All right. So we've talked a lot about theory. So let's talk a little bit about how you actually do this, how you can accomplish this.
You have to actually do it, not just talk about it.
Yeah. And there's a number of you in the government space. We can't allow our management to push us to install SharePoint and say, have fun and walk away. Like it, we've spent so many years doing that because it was the only choice, that it simply doesn't work anymore. Your end users will sit on the side of the road with their mittens, very disappointed in you,
Very
unable to get their work done.
They're very fine mittens.
So Joy and I have come up with a few suggestions on how to approach this, the conversations you need to have. And the first one, I love this one. M365 is a platform. It is not Exchange Online and SharePoint Online and Skype for Business Online. It is a platform that, yes, you're going to have people administering different pieces of it, but they have to work together for this to be successful.
I like to describe it as a multi-tool or a Swiss Army knife. SharePoint's still the really big blade, because that's where we put all our stuff, right?
Yep.
Even Stream now is starting news, SharePoint, OneDrive for storage. OneDrive, that's just baby SharePoint, right? So that's our document management tool. And then we have all those other tools, but it's like Jay said, it's the same platform. So we don't have people needing to say, oh, well, I just need SharePoint. No, if you're really going to embrace this M365 intranet world, we're embracing all the tools, or as many as it makes sense for us to do phased approach in our rollout.
Yeah. And we've mentioned it a few times, that the business side of thing, engaging the users, helping them understand metadata is important and it's valuable. And here's why. Giving them training and change management, not just here's a webinar, go to it and good luck. These things make them able to use your tool set going forward properly.
And that's important because, again, like Jay was saying, if we just say, here's SharePoint catch, right? We know what happens. It turns into a file share or it gets ignored.
Yep.
Right? We go to Teams and they've got nested folders all inside of their files tabs and it's not working well. Why not? We have to partner with the business, help them understand the value of metadata, help them see how that lets them slice and dice their data however they want to without that rigid construct of a folder system.
Yeah. And you also, I know I'm a vendor selling software, so it sounds a little skewed and biased, but you have to consider carefully what is available natively and
Hmm.
what third-party tools in the ecosystem exist for us to be able to be successful. And should we develop it ourselves? Should we use the Power Platform to accomplish this, and build it out, or should we go to a vendor? And you know what? There are perfectly valid reasons to do both. But you have to have a process for evaluating this, for planning for it, for having a governance committee to ask these questions to and come up with answers that make sense across the platform.
And keep in mind, the business needs what's in it for me to be
Yeah.
answered. And with the wide variety of tools, especially when you show them how flexible Teams is and how it just comes in and enhances that intranet experience, they'll see that what's in it for them very quickly.
It's one other piece that it's actually the third bullet down there, the understanding metadata and reporting options. It's interesting how many customers I speak to that talk about the structure that they use to report on, how much content is this bureau using, storing in Office 365,
Mhm.
or we use naming conventions because it lets us build reports on who this belongs to. And while those are all valid ways of thinking, um, you got to understand what metadata is available to you as an administrator and how you can set that metadata to be able to build those reports different ways. When we talk about governance with people, I get the question, what do you believe about naming conventions all the time? And naming conventions have a great place in this world. But did you
Absolutely.
know that if you put 17 prefixes on the beginning of the name of your site collection, users aren't going to be able to see the difference between them in Teams? Like, so on the other hand, you could insert all of that metadata into the property bag of your workspace and then build a report off that. So you've got the ability to shift gears. You just have to think about what those capabilities are.
Mhm.
All right, 15 slides in, let's talk about information architecture. So there are two primary perspectives that I like to talk about when we talk about information architecture. There is the technologist perspective, which looks at things like organizing structures, and that's not maybe that's not because you are looking at organizing structures, organizational structure, etc. But it is a part of the direction you're going. You also need to look at labeling schemas, navigational architecture, and ultimately searchability. How do we ensure this information is searchable for our end users? So from an information management, information architecture perspective, you're thinking, how do we structure our data? How do we represent that data? How do users browse to that data? And of course, how can they find it? What's their interface for doing that?
And all the work we put in here on the left side of the slide, just remember what it boils down to is the architecture for the business user, right? They need their content. We need to give them the context in which to find it. Your hub sites, your mega menu navigations, things like that really help with the structures and the navigation, searchability and findability. Hubs can really help enhance that because we're scoping that content to the audience before they even start searching. Very powerful.
Yeah, I had a great conversation on this week on Buzzkill a couple of months ago with a SharePoint admin out of the Richmond, Virginia area, Erin Glenn, and we were talking about how she built her navigation for her end users. She said she sat down with the end users and they did a card sorting exercise. They came up with what the topics were that they needed to navigate to. They organized them, and she realized that to her, um, a word would mean one thing and to them it would mean another thing. And so you've got to think about the context for the business user. What does reports mean to them versus you?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe reports is a bad example because it is going to be so drastically different across your organization. But taking trying to understand their perspective and how they think about it is going to help the system be successful as you move along. So next, there we go. So whenever I talk about information architecture and information management, especially in a platform like Microsoft 365, this is a conversation that we have with our customers all the time. And that is, what kind of workspaces are you going to need? And very often we get kind of pushed back. What do you mean, what kind? Who cares what kind of workspaces I'm going to need? If you can start to organize the types of workspaces you're going to have, then you can start to organize or start to define what technology supports those workspaces. I know that communities of practice are going to need a place to store videos, and they're going to need a place to have discussions. I know that project spaces are going to have a way to build out schedules and task lists. And by understanding the types of workspaces I have, then I can start defining the technology to support them. Then I can start defining the policies to enforce the way those tools are used. A team space might be an organizational process. So it might be, this is my IT department. This is my help desk. I know that they're going to need the following things. I also know that they're not going to need to have permissions, checked every month. But a project that's going to have external users, that's going to share client data, I want to make sure that's locked down. So it has to have approval for when new people are added. And it has to have a monthly attestation of users. And I know when the project's going to end. So let's not make them go through a renewal until that date comes up.
Yep.
So there are different things you can do as you start to think through this process.
But if you notice, when we want to talk about the type of space, we're also thinking about the people first. Who's going to be here? What do they need to do? People first, tools, and then build a fence around the backyard. It all just starts to flow. And you can't scope these tools at subsites, right?
Yeah.
So we're flattening that architecture, using our
Yep.
Microsoft 365 groups, and enabling the people to utilize the functionality.
Yeah, it's funny, in the old world, you might have, this might represent your IA itself. You might have a site collection for team spaces, and then underneath that, an HR site and an IT site and a finance site. And that's well and good and all, but then you lose those top
Mhm.
level capabilities that Microsoft is pushing out.
Mhm.
But by coming through this exercise, then you can know that there are going to be project spaces associated with team spaces. Like, you can start building that stuff ahead of time.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time here, don't panic.
Don't panic. Just know where your
It's
towel is, and everything will be fine. Bonus points for anyone that gets the towel reference. But it is different. It's a very different approach. And one of the most important things in change management is communicating with your users what's changing, why it's changing, when they can expect to see changes. So we don't just come in on Monday morning and say, surprise, we're changing everything you do today, right?
Yeah.
Not a good thing. But don't panic when you start breaking those sites up and out. The world truly does. Yes, Hitchhiker's Guide. Well done. The world truly does flatten out, but it gets a lot simpler in the process. Change is hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah. I really, I mean, what did we talk about? This is a different approach than what we're used to. And it's an approach that takes more planning, but it's an approach that enables more capabilities. So it is a lot, but it's worth it. And you're cleaning up problems that we had to deal with all the time. Content reorganization to match organizational reorganization. You're cleaning up the problem of broken inheritance. Raise your hand if you ever went to a link that you thought you'd have access to and got the permission denied. Raise your hand if you've submitted access to requests for that and never gotten a response, because the way that those systems are designed, it doesn't enable that access very well. Technically yes, but organizationally it's, yeah.
But did they ever put anything real in that email address that the request access went to?
No,
Yeah.
no.
No.
Yeah. So, I think that's everything, right, Joy?
I think that's everything. And oh, we used up to 6:45 on the dot. Well, depending on what time
Right.
zone you're in. You cannot have good AI without good IA.
I love that quote. That's
True.
fantastic.
We need to put that on the slide for the next time we do this.
I've already stolen it. Already stolen it.
Any questions or continued observations if you didn't have a chance to put it in the chat, or if we missed anything in chat, let us know. We've got our social media contacts here for both Jay and myself. If you're not currently connected with us on social, I hope you will connect with us on social.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and if you want to follow up any of these conversations, it doesn't just have to be about AvePoint products, although I am happy to talk about AvePoint products all day long. If you
And the
want to
next
follow
time,
up,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
I was going to say though, the next time we do this, I'm totally making it an official drinking game every time you say buzzkill.
I'm up for it. I am up, even if you're taking shots of water. You're a buzzkill, Joy. All right. Well, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you, everybody. This has
Yes,
been a lot of
thank you
fun,
so
for
much.
me at least. I don't know about you guys.
I enjoyed it.